The plane touched down in Lagos just past midday, its wheels skimming the hot tarmac, like fingers across worn skin. From the cabin window, Giannis Antetokounmpo watched the city stretch into a haze of color and movement, vendors weaving through traffic, children racing alongside rusted fences, the red earth folding into distant hills. He had been to many places since the world started calling him the Greek freak. Tokyo, Los Angeles, Paris. But this place, it wasn't new because of geography. It was new because of what he had brought with him, a memory, fragile and stubborn, refusing to fade. Weeks earlier, during a visit to a global charity event in Milwaukee, someone from the foundation had handed him a portfolio. Inside were photographs from a children's home in Enugu, Nigeria. Giannis had smiled politely, flipping through pages of bright eyes and quiet dignity until his hand stopped. The photo was slightly crooked. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, sat on a low bench, his knees dusty, hands folded. The light caught only half his face, but it was enough. The eyes, the posture, the guarded expression, like someone who knew too much too young. Giannis had stared at it for minutes. It wasn't just resemblance, it was presence. It was Alex, his younger brother, years ago on the broken tile floor of their apartment in Sepolia, Athens, wondering what they would eat that night. That photograph became an ache, not one that hurt, but one that called. Now, standing in the Lagos sun, Giannis adjusted the brim of his cap and exhaled slowly. The humidity wrapped around him like a second skin. The crowd outside the airport terminal had already begun to stir, phones raised, voices lifting his name. He waved briefly, offering a smile, but his thoughts were somewhere deeper, tracing the outline of that boy's face, the memory of his brother, and the thousands of silent threads that had brought him here. The drive from Lagos to Enugu was long, hours of road, scattered towns, the relentless rhythm of Nigeria pulsing through every dusty checkpoint. Giannis rode in silence for much of it, earphones in, but no music playing. Outside, mothers balanced buckets on their heads. Young boys kicked punctured footballs down rocky lanes. He remembered a time when his life was measured not by fame or statistics, but by small victories. A day with food, a pair of shoes that fit, a night without eviction threats. He had tried to carry that past with him, to never forget. But the machine of fame is loud, sometimes it drowns the quiet voices that made you. When they arrived at the orphanage, the sun was beginning to dip behind low clouds, casting a gold hue across the compound. It was modest, paint chipped, metal gates rusted, laundry flapping like flags of survival. A woman in her 50s approached, cautious but composed. She introduced herself as the director, Mrs. Okoro. Her handshake was firm, her gaze sharper than Giannis expected. She had seen enough visitors to know when someone came for the photo opportunity, but something in his demeanor, perhaps the absence of cameras or the quiet urgency in his eyes, made her pause. "Why here?" she asked, not unkindly. "Why now?" Giannis hesitated. What was he supposed to say? That he had seen a ghost? That a child he'd never met had dragged him across continents with a stare? Instead, he answered simply, "Because I saw someone I used to know. Someone I still know." She studied him for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "Come." Inside, the children had already gathered in the courtyard. They had been told a visitor was coming, but not who. When Giannis stepped through the gate, the younger ones clutched each other, unsure. A few older boys gasped, whispering his name. One girl blinked twice, as if testing whether he was real. But it was the boy in the corner who didn't react that caught his eye. Same posture, same folded hands, same heavy silence. Giannis stopped in his tracks. The boy's name was Chuka. He didn't rise like the others, he simply looked. And the moment their eyes met, something passed between them. It wasn't recognition in the traditional sense. They were strangers, but it was something older than memory, like two mirrors briefly aligned. As the children clustered around him, asking questions, showing him drawings, pointing at his impossibly large hands, Giannis smiled and knelt down to their level. He laughed. He asked names. He listened. But his gaze returned to Chuka again and again, pulled like gravity. The boy sat still, watching. Not hostile, not curious, just waiting. Later, when the children had returned to their rooms for dinner, Giannis asked Mrs. Okoro about Chuka. She sighed. He's quiet, very smart, but guarded. Been here almost 2 years. Came after his father passed and his mother vanished. Doesn't talk about it, doesn't ask for much, but he watches everything. Giannis nodded slowly. That too was familiar. That night, unable to sleep, Giannis walked the perimeter of the orphanage. The air was thick with night sounds, crickets, distant music, a generator humming like a tired heart. He thought of his own childhood again, of the nights when he and his brothers would lie awake, listening to Athens outside their window. Not the postcard Athens, but the Athens they lived in, full of sirens, sweat, and immigrant silence. His mother would sing to them in Yoruba, lullabies stretched thin by worry. Sometimes, when the hunger was too loud, Alex would crawl into his bed, curling up like a question mark against his back. That was the memory that came now, uninvited but welcome. The weight of his little brother's head, the shared blanket, the sound of breath trying to stay calm. By morning, he knew he wasn't done. He asked Mrs. Okoro if he could stay longer. She looked at him curiously. "What are you hoping to find?" she asked. He didn't know how to explain it in words. That in Chuka's stillness, he saw a chapter he hadn't closed. That in the boy's silence, he heard an echo he had forgotten to honor. "I'm not trying to find something," he said. "I think I'm trying to remember something." She said nothing, only nodded again. As the sun rose, casting new light on old walls, Giannis found himself sitting on the same bench from the photograph. The wood creaked beneath him. Across the courtyard, Chuka emerged with the others, dragging his feet just slightly, the way Alex used to when he didn't want to play but didn't want to be left out. Giannis stood, holding a worn-out basketball under one arm. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He simply bounced the ball once, twice, and let it roll across the concrete. Chuka stopped it with his foot. Their eyes met again. Giannis smiled. Not the smile for cameras, but the one reserved for someone who speaks your language without using words. That was how it began. Not with headlines, not with speeches, but with a look and a ball, and the quiet promise between two boys who had seen the world try to forget them and chose to remember each other instead. The sun hung high, white and wide in the sky, casting long shadows through the dusty courtyard. Giannis sat on the edge of a low wall, his elbows on his knees, watching the children play. The ball bounced unevenly on the cracked concrete, chased by a chorus of barefoot determination. It was chaotic and joyful, loud and careless in that specific way childhood manages, until it wasn't. Until one boy remained in the corner, arms crossed, unmoved by the swirl around him. Chuka stood there again, just as he had the day before, unmoved not out of shyness, but something harder. He was observing, assessing, measuring the energy of others before deciding how much of himself he was willing to give. Giannis recognized the look. He had worn it too many times to mistake it. He rose slowly and crossed the yard, the ball tucked under one arm. He approached Chuka without ceremony. No introduction, no invitation, just presence, just silence. "You don't like to play?" Giannis asked softly, crouching so their eyes were level. Chuka didn't answer. His gaze dropped to the ball, then to the ground. He shrugged, then said in a low voice, "I don't like to lose." Giannis let out a quiet laugh. "Me neither." The boy's eyes flicked up to meet his. A small flicker of something, maybe surprise, maybe challenge, passed through them. Giannis bounced the ball once, then offered it, not as a gift, but as a gesture. A question. Chuka hesitated, then took it. His fingers wrapped around it like they knew the texture already, like it wasn't the first time. Giannis stood back and let the silence breathe. "You play alone sometimes?" he asked. "Sometimes," Chuka replied, eyes still on the ball. "Me too." There was another pause, comfortable this time. Chuka looked up again. "You're really tall." Giannis smiled. "That's what they tell me." The boy allowed the corner of his mouth to twitch, almost a smile. Almost. Later that day, a makeshift court was marked out in the back corner of the compound, near the fence where the laundry line sagged with clothes faded from sun and time. Giannis rolled up his sleeves and pulled a few of the older kids together. They formed teams quickly, Improvised rules, no real boundaries, no scoreboard. Just movement, just breath, just the language of the game. Chuka watched from the edge. Giannis made eye contact once, nothing more. No pressure, no beckoning. But when one of the teams was short a player, Chuka walked forward, wordless. He didn't ask. He simply took his place on the court as though it had always belonged to him. The game began. At first, Chuka barely touched the ball, hovering on the edges, passing quickly when it came his way. But Giannis on the opposing team began to watch him more closely. The way he moved, the way he scanned, there was intelligence in every step, caution wrapped in calculation. And then it happened. A loose ball skidded across the court. Chuka darted forward faster than anyone expected, scooped it with one hand, spun around, and drove toward the basket. Two defenders came at him. He hesitated, cut right, then arched a shot high off the board. It hit the metal rim, bounced once, dropped in. The yard erupted. The other kids screamed his name, laughing and running toward him. Chuka's face was still, almost confused by the celebration around him. But then he turned, and his eyes met Giannis's. Giannis raised a fist, slow and proud, and Chuka smiled. Not halfway, not a twitch, a real, full, unguarded smile. It cracked open something Giannis hadn't realized he'd been protecting in himself. A memory, sudden and sharp, of Alex making his first basket on a rusted hoop, nailed to their neighbor's wall. He'd run around in circles, screaming while Giannis chased him, laughing so hard he fell. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was blood. It was bond. After the game, while the kids collapsed in the shade and traded stories of who did what and how amazing it was, Giannis found Chuka sitting alone again, this time near the water tank, drinking slowly from a plastic cup. "You played great," he said. Chuka shrugged. "They let me shoot." "No," Giannis replied gently. "You made them notice." The boy looked down, his fingers tapping against the cup. Then quietly he asked, "You have brothers?" Giannis nodded. "3. Younger?" "One younger. Alex." The name hung in the air like a prayer. "He play too?" Giannis smiled. "He plays. He's better than me." Chuka looked unconvinced. "You're the best." Giannis shook his head. "Sometimes. But he's the one who always believed, even when I didn't." Chuka was quiet again. Then he said, "I had a brother, but I don't know where he is." Giannis felt something shift in his chest. "Do you remember him?" Chuka nodded. "He used to make up stories, every night. He'd say we were going to play for Nigeria, or go to America and be in movies or be astronauts." "And you believed him?" The boy's voice lowered. "I wanted to." Giannis sat down beside him, back against the warm wall. The silence stretched, long and full. "You know," he said after a while, "when I was little, I didn't think we'd ever leave Greece. Not really. We were just trying to stay one more day, one more meal. I didn't know if we were invisible or just forgotten." Chuka looked at him, really looked for the first time. "But you left." "I didn't leave," Giannis said. "I carried it with me. Every step, I still do." The boy leaned back, staring at the sky. "I think I forget sometimes," Chuka said, "how to dream." Giannis didn't respond right away. He just reached down, picked up a small stone, and rolled it in his palm. "You don't have to dream big all the time," he said. "Just dream next. One step, one shot, one smile, and then another." Chuka nodded slowly. "I think I can do that." That night, as the stars took their place across the sky, Giannis sat with Mrs. Okoro in her office. They drank tea, the air thick with quiet. "He's changed, hasn't he?" she asked. "I don't know," Giannis said. "Maybe he just remembered something." She gave him a look. "And you?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "When I look at him, I see a part of myself that I almost let get quiet. The part that had nothing. The part that had everything." The next day was supposed to be his last. He had obligations waiting, training, endorsements, appearances. But that morning, as the children filed out into the yard and began their chores, Giannis delayed his departure. He walked again with Chuka, this time with no ball between them. They didn't talk much. There wasn't a need. Sometimes healing doesn't come from answers, but from company. As they stood by the fence watching the sky pale toward noon, Chuka turned suddenly. "You're going, right?" Giannis nodded. "Soon." The boy was quiet, then asked, "Will you come back?" It was the hardest question, because promises are heavy, especially when made to children who have already learned not to trust them. Giannis crouched down so they were eye to eye again. "I don't know when," he said honestly, "but I will." Chuka studied him, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once. "I'll be here," Giannis smiled. "I know." As he walked away, he looked back once. The boy hadn't moved, still as a statue, steady as a seed waiting for rain. Giannis didn't wave. He didn't speak. He just let the silence say what it needed to. The morning of his departure arrived with a quiet weight. There were no speeches, no fanfare. The sun peeked over the horizon in pale streaks, and the compound stirred to life slowly, as if reluctant to accept that the rhythm of the past few days was about to change. Giannis rose before the others. He stood barefoot on the cool cement floor of the guest room, the early breeze brushing across his skin through the cracked window. In the dim light, he packed slowly, not because he had much to bring, but because every movement felt like a kind of farewell. Outside, a few children were already beginning their chores, sweeping the courtyard, rinsing laundry in metal basins, collecting buckets of water from the large plastic tank in the corner. There were birds singing somewhere above the trees, a rhythm that belonged to this place alone. Giannis stepped out, nodding to a few of the staff. No one said much. There was something sacred in silence today. He found Chuka near the garden, carefully watering a line of newly planted seedlings. The boy didn't look up when Giannis approached. He simply said, without turning, "They'll grow if they're not eaten by goats." Giannis chuckled softly. "That's life, huh?" Chuka shrugged. "You plant. Something eats. You plant again." It wasn't wisdom forced by age. It was something deeper. Acceptance not as surrender, but as resilience. "I wanted to say goodbye," Giannis said after a pause. The boy stopped watering, stood up, and turned toward him. "Okay." But it wasn't okay. Not really. Giannis could feel the way the words hung between them, fragile and unfinished. He wanted to say more, something meaningful, something lasting, but all he managed was, "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me." The boy tilted his head, curious. "Of what?" Giannis took a breath. "That I'm not done being who I was before all this." Chuka didn't answer. He didn't need to. In his quiet stare was all the understanding Giannis could ask for. After breakfast, Giannis sat with Mrs. Okoro under the shade of the old mango tree in the far corner of the yard. The children were gathered elsewhere, and for a moment the compound felt hushed, expectant. She handed him a mug of tea and sat across from him, her eyes observant, thoughtful. "I appreciate that you came," she said, "not just for the children, but for yourself." He nodded. "I didn't know how much I needed it." "You're not the first," she said, "but you might be the first who stayed long enough to feel it." Giannis sipped his tea, the warmth spreading through his chest like something medicinal. "I want to do more." She raised an eyebrow. "A donation?" "No," he said. "Well, yes, but not just that. I want to support education, long-term, sports, sure, but also scholarships, healthcare, food security. I don't want it to be a headline. I want it to be a seed." She smiled at that. "Just make sure the goats don't eat it." He laughed, and for a moment, the weight lifted. Later, before the car arrived to take him back to the airport, Giannis called his mother. The connection was fuzzy at first, long-distance signals bouncing between Lagos, Athens, and Milwaukee, but her voice came through eventually, warm and slightly trembling. "How is it?" she asked in Yoruba. "It's like stepping into a memory I never had," he replied. She was quiet, listening. "There's a boy here," he said. "He reminds me of Alex, of me." She let out a small breath. "We leave so much behind, don't we?" Sometimes I think the parts I left behind were the best of me. No, she said gently. They were the softest. But you've carried them, Giannis. That's what matters. He told her about Chuka, about the way he walked, the way he spoke, the way he hesitated before trusting. She listened without interruption. You can't save everyone, she said, as mothers do. I know, he said, but maybe I can save something in him, something in me. When the call ended, he sat alone for a while, just breathing, just being. Before leaving, a photograph was taken. Not a formal one, no lighting, no planning, just a quick snapshot with an old digital camera someone handed him. In it, Giannis and Chuka stood side by side. The boy held the same ball they had played with the day before. He wore a shirt 2 sizes too big and a grin that belonged to no one but him. Giannis crouched beside him, one arm resting casually on his shoulder. There was no posing, no rehearsed expression, just the raw, simple truth of 2 people connected by something neither could fully name. He didn't post it. He didn't frame it. He folded it carefully and kept it in his wallet. The drive to the airport was quiet. The road unfolded like a slow exhale, villages giving way to open land, the pulse of Nigeria receding into the rearview mirror. Giannis watched the landscape change, but his thoughts remained behind, stuck somewhere between the sound of children laughing and the silence of Chuka's stare. When he landed in Milwaukee 2 days later, reporters were waiting. They asked about the trip, about the off-season, about the team's chances for next year. Giannis answered politely, but his mind wandered. He gave them what they needed, but he kept something for himself. In one interview, when asked what the most important thing he learned during his visit was, he paused, then said, that you don't stop being who you were just because you become someone else. They nodded, scribbling notes, not really understanding. But that was okay. Some things weren't meant to be understood by everyone. In the weeks that followed, he reached out to organizations quietly. He set up a partnership between his foundation and the orphanage. He arranged for quarterly shipments of supplies, educational materials, food, medical care. He insisted that it be anonymous, no press, no campaigns. He also wrote a letter, not an email, a real handwritten letter. It was addressed to Chuka. In it, he told the boy how proud he was, how strong he was, how the way he carried himself, so steady and cautious, had reminded him of someone he loved deeply. He ended it with a promise. You reminded me of my brother, but you're not my brother. You're you, and that's more than enough. A month later, he received a reply. The handwriting was uneven, the grammar unsure, but the message was clear. I still play every day. I tell the other boys they have to pass the ball. They don't always listen, but I'm learning. Thank you for the letter. I read it to myself at night. I want to be good like you, but not famous, just good. Giannis smiled when he read that. He kept the letter on his nightstand, folded inside the same envelope. Sometimes in the middle of the night when he couldn't sleep, he would read it again just to hear that voice. Months passed, then a year. The world moved fast. Seasons, playoffs, headlines. But some things moved at their own pace. Then one day, he received another letter. This one had a photo. It was Chuka, now taller, standing in front of a small chalkboard. He wore a uniform shirt, neatly tucked. Behind him were other children, seated at desks. The caption said, "First day of school, funded by the program." Giannis stared at the photo for a long time. He thought of the stone in his hand, of the quiet boy under the mango tree, of the broken hoop in Athens, and the dreams whispered between brothers in the dark. And he realized something. He had spent so much of his life climbing, running, proving. But in that orphanage, in the dust and laughter and silence, he had remembered the one truth that mattered most. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you lift up, what you return to, what you plant in others, and what grows when you're no longer there to water it.